I remember the sound of the door clicking shut behind him. It wasn't loud, not dramatic, just a quiet final sound that echoed louder in my chest than in the room itself. There I was, barefoot still in the nightgown I'd worn, through feedings and tears, holding one of our newborns while the other whimpered in the crib. My heart didn't break in one violent crack. It shattered in silence in pieces scattered across the floor, with the milk bottles, burp cloths, and hope. Ethan didn't yell. He didn't argue. He just said the words like he was reading them off a page someone else had written. "I can't do this, Layla. I'm sorry." I didn't answer at first. I couldn't. My throat was dry, the kind of dry that feels like you're choking on air. I just stood there, my arms numb from holding the baby too long, legs weak from nights without sleep. I watched as he grabbed the duffel bag he must have packed earlier. I watched his eyes avoid mine. He didn't even kiss the twins goodbye, just walked out. It wasn't always like that. Once we had laughed under autumn skies, caught in the kind of love that makes you believe in forever. I was a design intern, newly arrived in Chicago from Atlanta, green and wide-eyed. He was Ethan Hartwell, a real estate scion who made headlines just by attending charity galas. I didn't know any of that when we first met at a bookstore downtown. He was just the guy who offered me his umbrella during a surprise rainstorm. Back then it felt like fate. We moved quickly, maybe too quickly. But it was real, or at least I believed it was. His laugh made me feel safe. His hands, strong but gentle, made promises I trusted. When I told him I was pregnant, he didn't flinch. He pulled me in, kissed my forehead, and said we'd make it work. Then came the introduction to her. Victoria Hartwell. The name alone carried weight in Chicago society. Ethan's mother. She didn't sneer or hiss. Her cruelty was subtle, precise. A compliment with barbs, a smile that judged. That first dinner at the Hartwell estate, I remember the way she scanned me like a flaw in her furniture. "You're an interior designer," she asked, as if I'd said I sold hot dogs under a bridge. "How creative." I smiled. I always smiled. That was my mistake. Weeks passed. Ethan changed. Calls with his mother lasted longer. He grew distracted, restless, still kind, still tender, but less present. By the time the twins were born, he was like a photograph fading under sunlight, there, but no longer vivid. And now, he was gone. I sat on the edge of the bed after he left both babies asleep, the silence so thick it buzzed in my ears. My chest ached, my mind refusing to catch up with reality. Abandoned, not just by a man, but by the life I thought I was building. I could have stayed there, could have let grief swallow me. But something shifted. As I looked at my children, two tiny humans who hadn't asked for any of this, I realized I didn't have the luxury of falling apart. They needed warmth, food, lullabies, love. They needed me. So I stood up. It was shaky, that first step. My legs wobbled. My heart still felt like shattered glass. But I walked to the kitchen, made a bottle, changed a diaper. Then I opened my laptop and typed in work from home jobs. That night I didn't sleep, not because I was heartbroken, though I was, but because I had decided. Ethan may have walked away, but I would not. Not from them, not from myself. I had cried enough. Tomorrow I would begin again. And this time, no one, not a man, not his mother, not even the shadow of who I used to be, was going to stop me. The apartment was never really quiet. Even when the twins finally drifted off to sleep, the silence buzzed with tension, an endless loop of what-ifs, unpaid bills, and half-read job postings. The walls seemed to press in tighter each day, the chipped linoleum and stained blinds a constant reminder that this wasn't just temporary anymore. This was our life now. There were days I'd stare at the screen for hours, tweaking my resume, refreshing job boards, willing someone, anyone, to take a chance on a single mom with newborns. But most of the time, the only thing that filled my inbox was silence. Sometimes rejection, usually nothing. One hiring manager actually told me we need someone who's available round the clock. Mothers tend to get distracted, like being responsible for two fragile lives was a character flaw. I learned quickly that employers don't like desperate. They don't like flexible schedule due to childcare. They don't like visible exhaustion. And that was all I had. The money ran out faster than I expected. Ethan hadn't left so much as a forwarding address, let alone support. I applied for assistance, diaper vouchers, food stamps, the works. Humbling doesn't even begin to describe standing in line with crying babies, explaining to a caseworker that you used to design penthouse interiors. Every outing was a calculated risk. I couldn't afford a sitter, so the babies came with me everywhere, to the grocery store, to the library for internet access, even to job interviews. Once in the middle of a meeting with a potential client, Harper threw up all over my only blazer. The woman didn't say anything cruel, but she didn't call back either. I skipped meals to make formula last, pushed strollers for miles because the bus fare meant I could buy half a gallon of milk. My body still ached from childbirth, but there was no space to recover, not when survival demanded so much. Nights were the hardest. The twins would cry in shifts, and I'd pace the floor with one in my arms while the other wailed in the crib. I couldn't remember the last time I slept more than 3 hours. My reflection became a stranger, sunken eyes, unbrushed hair, a woman who looked like she belonged in one of those before commercials. The days blurred together, and sometimes I'd find myself staring out the window, numb, wondering if this was it, if this was all life would ever be. But then there were the moments, those small golden seconds that kept me afloat. The way Luca curled his fingers around mine when I fed him. Harper's first smile at 3 a.m. when I was sure I couldn't take one more step. Their trust in me was absolute, unshakable, and it broke me in the best way. I started writing at night between feedings. Nothing fancy, just journaling at first, but it felt like exhaling. I wrote about the job rejections, the fear, the sheer ridiculousness of motherhood some days. And people listened. I joined an online support group for single moms, and for the first time, I didn't feel invisible. I wasn't alone. One post got shared, then another. A small blog invited me to write. It paid $20 apiece, but to me it felt like gold. Recognition, proof I wasn't useless, that I still had something to offer the world. Slowly, painfully, things began to shift. Not overnight, but inch by inch. I started to feel the ground again under my feet. It wasn't triumph yet. It was still hunger and fatigue and the haunting weight of being left behind. But there was also fire, quiet, smoldering and growing stronger. I wasn't out of the tunnel. But for the first time in a long time, I saw the faintest light ahead. It started with a tear. One of Harper's onesies split at the seam as I pulled it over her tiny arms. It wasn't the first. Cheap fabric didn't hold up under endless washes and spit up. But this time, I stared at the unraveling thread and didn't feel defeated. I felt an idea. My mother used to sew. Nothing fancy, curtains, Halloween costumes, the occasional hem. But when I was little, she taught me how to thread a needle, how to guide fabric beneath the machine without letting it bunch. We used to sit on the living room floor surrounded by scraps stitching tiny clothes for my dolls. I hadn't touched a sewing machine in years. That night after the twins were down, I knocked on Mrs. Langley's door, the widow who lived downstairs and liked to feed me questionable casserole dishes every Sunday. She still had her old Singer, a dusty relic from the 80s, tucked into a corner under a lace cover. "You sew?" she asked, eyebrows raised. "I used to," I said. "I'm thinking about starting again." She waved her hand and smiled. "Take it. Lord knows I haven't used it since Clinton was president." Back in my apartment, I cleared the kitchen table and spent the night hunched over her machine. My stitches were crooked. The fabric was scrap from a thrift store bag. But by dawn, I'd made a tiny pair of leggings for Harper gray cotton with little yellow stars. When I slipped them on her, they fit perfectly. I stared at her for a moment, my eyes burning with something I hadn't felt in months: pride. Not survival, not exhaustion, just pride. Over the next few days, I made more simple onesies, cozy rompers, soft knit hats with bear ears. I sewed while the twins napped while they played on the blanket beside me, even while bouncing one in a wrap across my chest. I didn't know exactly where it was going, only that it felt good to create again, to build something that wasn't about just getting by. I posted a photo of Luca wearing one of the sets on a mom group I followed online, just to share. I didn't expect anything from it, but the comments rolled in faster than I thought. "Where did you get that? Do you sell these? I'd buy one in a heartbeat." I hesitated. Who was I to sell anything? I didn't even have a website, let alone a brand. But something inside me whispered, why not? I created a simple page on Etsy and named the shop Willow and Thread, a quiet nod to my mother's favorite tree in our backyard. I listed 5 items, nothing flashy, just cozy hand-sewn baby wear in soft colors. It didn't explode. There was no sudden rush. But 2 days later, I got a sale. A woman in Oregon bought a newborn romper with little clouds stitched across the chest. I stared at the notification on my screen for 10 whole minutes, crying softly with Harper in my lap. That $25 meant more than any paycheck I'd ever received. It was hope. It was proof. More orders trickled in. Then a message from a parenting blogger asking if she could review one of my outfits. I mailed her 2 sets, my hands trembling as I sealed the package. She posted a glowing review a week later. My inbox lit up like a Christmas tree. It wasn't just about the clothes, it was about the storyline. Other moms resonated with it. They saw me not just as a shop owner, but as a fighter, a woman trying to reclaim something of herself. And slowly, quietly, Willow and Thread started to bloom. It wasn't just a side project anymore. It was the first brick in the foundation of a new life. There's a strange kind of exhaustion that comes with building something from scratch while raising twins. It's not just physical. It's in your bones, in your brain, in the way the clock seems to mock you every hour. But somehow, every stitch I sewed, every email I wrote, every fabric I folded late into the night, it all meant something. Willow and Thread was gaining traction, but not enough to breathe. Orders came in slowly, just enough to keep the lights on and formula stocked. I shipped pieces from my living room table, wrapped them in tissue paper I bought from the dollar store, sealed them with hand-cut thank you notes. Each time I printed a shipping label, I whispered, "Thank you" to the customer, like they'd just handed me a lifeline. The twins were nearly crawling now. Luca had a habit of kicking fabric piles, sending cotton clouds across the floor like confetti. Harper babbled constantly, especially when I sat at the sewing machine. I liked to think she was cheering me on. Still, it was chaos, beautiful, relentless chaos. I'd sew while rocking them in their bouncer chairs with 1-foot-type blog posts during their naps, and answer customer inquiries with Harper dozing on my chest. Some days were brutal. Orders went missing. A batch of fabric arrived damaged. A buyer left a 1-star review because her package took too long to arrive. Never mind the snowstorm that shut down half the city. I cried behind closed doors more times than I'll admit, wondering if I was kidding myself, if I was just chasing air. But I couldn't stop. Not just because I needed the income, because this was mine. It was the first thing in years that hadn't been tied to a man or a family name or anyone else's approval. Still, we were plateauing. Then came the day that changed everything. It was a Tuesday. I'd barely slept. Harper had a mild fever, and I was late finishing a custom order. I scrolled social media between feedings, mindlessly refreshing the Willow and Thread Instagram, expecting the usual handful of likes. But something was off. The notifications were endless. I clicked on a comment. "Mama Wildheart tagged you in a post." I froze. I knew that name. Mama Wildheart was one of the biggest mom influencers online, hundreds of thousands of followers featured in parenting magazines, a queen in the world of natural parenting and handmade brands. I clicked the tag. There she was holding her newborn in a sun-drenched photo, the baby wrapped in one of my rompers. My design, my stitches. The caption read, "Can we talk about how obsessed I am with this handmade baby outfit from Willow and Thread? Its buttery soft fits like a dream, and the story behind this mama-run brand is beyond inspiring. Support small shops, especially the warrior mamas." I gasped so hard I scared Luca. Within minutes, my shop exploded. Orders flooded in dozens, then hundreds. Emails, messages, wholesale requests. I sat at my kitchen tables, hands shaking the screen, lighting up like Vegas. I didn't eat, I didn't sleep, I just sewed and cried and sewed more. I called in every favor I could. Mrs. Langley came upstairs to help fold and pack. My neighbor Jasmine offered to babysit for a few hours a day, in exchange for a few free outfits for her niece. Within a week, I had sold out my entire inventory. That's when I knew I needed to go bigger. I rebranded. Willow and Thread became Little Blessings, a name that felt closer to my heart, a tribute to Luca and Harper, who had saved me in more ways than they'd ever understand. I hired a part-time seamstress, built a new website, opened wholesale conversations with boutique stores. And through it all, I stayed grounded, because I remembered the silence of that apartment, the hunger, the nights I held both babies and whispered promises I wasn't sure I could keep. Now those promises were becoming real. Little Blessings wasn't just a brand. It was proof that something beautiful could grow from brokenness. The morning my face appeared on national television, I was wearing mismatched socks and juggling 2 cups of spilled apple juice. It wasn't glamorous, not like it probably looked on screen. The segment had been recorded weeks earlier, after a parenting magazine ran a feature on Little Blessings and passed my name along to a talk show producer. I nearly said no to the interview who had time for studio makeup and pre-show jitters when there were twin toddlers climbing bookshelves, but I said yes. And now there I was on TV. Joining us today is Amanda Clark, founder of Little Blessings, the children's clothing brand that's redefining comfort and style for modern families. The host beamed while footage of me sewing in my small home studio rolled behind her. Amanda, your story is inspiring. Abandoned by your partner shortly after giving birth to twins, you turned that heartbreak into a thriving business. What gave you the strength? The screen cut to me composed and confident in a pale blue blouse. I smiled gently. Honestly, I didn't think I had a choice. I looked at my children and I knew I had to become the person they could count on. I couldn't afford to fall apart. It was honest. It was raw. And for the first time in years, I felt seen not as a victim, not as a charity case, but as a woman who had survived and rebuilt. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have imagined, was who else had been watching. Miles away, in a high-rise office, wrapped in glass and silence, Daniel Prescott sat behind a mahogany desk, his eyes glued to the TV. He hadn't recognized me at first. I wasn't the woman he'd left in a threadbare apartment, exhausted and desperate, clutching newborns and begging for answers. The Amanda on screen was poised, radiant, successful, and she didn't say his name once. The moment the interview ended, Daniel sat back in his leather chair, dazed. He hadn't thought of me in a long time, not really. Oh, he knew he had children out there, somewhere. But in the years since he walked away, he had buried that chapter under deals, dinners, and his mother's meticulously curated life plan. But seeing me now smiling with dignity and purpose, something inside him cracked. He thought he'd be relieved, that I was okay, that I'd moved on. But the truth hit harder. I hadn't just moved on. I'd thrived without him. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He paced the marble floors of his mother's estate, the silence of luxury pressing in like a weight. The walls were full of portraits and antiques, but empty of warmth. and for the first time, he noticed just how hollow it all felt. He pulled out his phone and typed a message. "Amanda, it's me, Daniel. I saw you on TV. Can we talk?" He hovered over the screen for a full minute before pressing send. Back in my home, I didn't hear the buzz right away. Harper was crying, Luca had spilled yogurt on the rug, and a customer email needed answering. When I finally picked up my phone and saw the name Daniel Prescott, I went still. Not angry, not emotional, just still. I opened the message, read it once, then again. I didn't reply. Not out of pettiness, because I didn't need to. This wasn't a cliffhanger, it was closure. I had no space in my life for ghosts. Daniel may have been part of my beginning, but he had no place in my now. I had become the woman he never believed I could be, and I wasn't about to slow down for the man who left me in the dust. Instead, I set my phone down, turned back to my kids, and kept moving forward exactly as I always had. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon when the past came knocking literally. I had just put the twins down for their nap and was folding inventory in the living room, soft music playing in the background. My hands moved automatically, fold smooth stack, while my mind drifted to designs I was sketching for a new toddler line. I was in the middle of planning a pop-up event with 2 other mom-owned brands when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I wiped my hands, peeked through the peephole, and there he was, Daniel. He looked smaller than I remembered, not in stature but in presence. Gone was the crisp confidence, the arrogant posture. His shoulders slouched beneath a navy jacket, and there were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there the last time I saw him. I opened the door halfway, keeping the frame between us like a wall I couldn't yet bring down. "Hi," he said, his voice soft, uncertain. I waited. "I wasn't sure if you'd even open the door," he added, rubbing the back of his neck. I raised a brow, arms folded. "Then why are you here, Daniel?" He let out a slow breath, his eyes flicking briefly toward the apartment behind me, the place where I had rebuilt everything he walked away from. "I saw you on TV. And I've been thinking about it ever since. About you, the kids, what I did. I didn't speak. I wanted to see where he'd go with this, what words he thought might undo years of silence. "I'm not here to ask for anything," he said quickly. "I know I don't deserve a second chance. I needed to tell you I'm sorry." He looked at me then. Really looked, like maybe for the first time he saw the woman standing in front of him, not the girl he abandoned. I was a coward, he admitted. I let my mother dictate my choices. I thought I was doing the right thing, choosing the life I was raised for. But it was a lie, and I've paid for it every day since. His words floated in the space between us, but they didn't sting. They didn't touch me the way they might have once, because I had already done the hard work of healing. "You don't need to explain," I said finally, my tone calm but firm. "You made your choice, and I made mine." Daniel nodded slowly. I wanted you to know that I regret it. All of it. I think about the twins, about what I missed, about what you went through. They're happy, I said. They're thriving, and they have everything they need. His eyes watered just slightly. He blinked quickly. "Do they ask about me?" I hesitated. "They're too young. But when the time comes, they'll know the truth." He swallowed hard, guilt etched into every line on his face. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he murmured. "I just needed to say it." For a moment I looked at him, not with anger or bitterness, but with absolute clarity. He was a chapter I had closed long ago, a lesson I had already learned. "You're right," I said. "I've moved on, Daniel. I've built something beautiful out of what you left behind. And I don't need anything from you, not your apology, not your regret." He nodded slowly, like he had expected this, but hoped for something softer. I stepped back, my hand resting on the door. Take care of yourself, I said, and gently pushed the door closed. There was no slam, no dramatic music, just the quiet click of a door sealing a chapter. On the other side stood the man I once loved, but on this side stood the woman who had learned to love herself more. The grand foyer of the Montgomery estate gleamed under chandeliers that cost more than some people's homes. But to Daniel, everything looked dull. The shine didn't catch his eye like it used to. The marble floors felt cold. The silence, once comforting, now hung heavy, like a weight pressing down on his chest. He stood in the entryway, still chilled from the walk to his car, after Amanda had closed the door in his face. He hadn't expected forgiveness, but he'd hoped deep down that maybe her voice would tremble, that a small crack in her composure would give him a thread to hold on to. She didn't. She was steady. Sure, stronger than he'd ever seen her, and it gutted him. He walked into the sitting room where Victoria Montgomery, his mother, sat, with a crystal glass of red wine and a book she probably wasn't reading. She didn't look up when he entered. "You're home early," she said coolly, flipping a page. "I went to see Amanda," Daniel said, his voice stiff. That made her pause. "Why?" she asked, setting her glass down. "You know she's moved on." Daniel nodded slowly. "Yes, she has. And it's my fault she had to." Victoria didn't respond. She just crossed one leg over the other and waited. "I left her because you told me to." He continued, taking a step closer. "Because you said it was the only way I'd stay in this family, in this business. You said she'd hold me back." "She would have," Victoria said, unfazed. "You think you'd be where you are now if you'd stayed with her. You'd be living in some cramped apartment, drowning in diapers and debt." Daniel let out a short, humorless laugh. Funny. That cramped apartment turned into the headquarters of one of the most successful children's brands in the country. Amanda built an empire out of nothing while I sat here pretending I was happy. His mother's lips tightened. She got lucky. "No," he snapped. "She worked every single day. She didn't inherit anything. She wasn't handed connections or trust funds, and she's more fulfilled than I've ever been." Victoria stood now, her voice sharpening. "Don't throw away everything we gave you because of guilt. You made your choice. It's done." Daniel looked around the room, the curated art, the antique clocks, the sterile perfection. "Yeah, I did. I chose this. And I lost everything that mattered in the process. You gained everything she corrected. Power, reputation, legacy. No mother," he said, meeting her eyes. "I gained emptiness." The room fell silent. Daniel's next words came slowly but firmly. "I don't want this anymore. I don't want a life built on sacrifice and control. I don't want to wake up one day and still be the son you molded instead of the man I chose to be." Victoria scoffed. "So what now? You'll go chasing after a woman who doesn't want you." "No," he replied calmly. "I'm not chasing anyone. I'm just done being someone I'm not." He walked over to the fireplace, reached for the keyring that had been his since college, his company car, his penthouse, his private office, and placed it gently on the mantel. "What are you doing?" she asked, alarm creeping into her voice. "I'm leaving," Daniel said. Victoria's eyes narrowed. "If you walk out now, you walk away from the entire Montgomery legacy. You'll be cut off." Daniel smiled softly. "Then I guess I'm finally free." Without waiting for a reply, he turned and walked to the front door. His footsteps echoed across the tile like a countdown. As the door shut behind him, Daniel stood for a moment in the cold Chicago air. No car, no staff, no scripted future. Just himself. For the first time in years, he felt the sting of wind on his face, without a barrier between him and the world. It hurt, but it also meant he was alive. And maybe, just maybe, that was the beginning of something real. The mornings in our new home carried a different kind of silence. Not empty or heavy, just peaceful. Sunlight filtered through soft white curtains, warming the hardwood floors, where Harper and Luca played with wooden blocks and scattered storybooks. The coffee machine hissed in the kitchen while I reviewed fabric swatches for our upcoming fall line. This was my rhythm now, CEO by day mom every minute, and somehow both versions of me coexisted, flawed, but thriving, tired but fulfilled. Little Blessings had grown beyond anything I could have imagined. We had 2 retail spaces, a small team of dedicated seamstresses, and a loyal community of parents who followed our story from the very beginning. Major magazines ran features on our brand. Single mom turned fashion founder had become a headline that inspired people, women especially, who needed to see someone come out the other side stronger. But even with all the success, it wasn't the applause that mattered most. It was moments like this. My kids giggling in their matching mama-made-me pajamas, a home that smelled like lavender and cinnamon. Peace finally earned and entirely mine. One Saturday, while the kids and I were at Lincoln Park, a woman approached me as I sat on a bench sipping lukewarm coffee and watching Harper chase pigeons. "Excuse me," she said, a bit breathless. "You're Amanda Clark, right?" I blinked, startled, then smiled. "Yes, I am. Oh my God," she said, her hands fluttering with excitement. "I just wanted to say I've followed your journey since the blog days. You're incredible, seriously. What you built? It's amazing." Her sincerity caught me off guard. She wasn't gushing, she was speaking like a woman who understood, who maybe had her own battles. "I just had my second baby," she added, "and your posts were the only thing that made me feel like I wasn't failing." "Thank you." I stood and gave her a gentle hug. "You're not failing," I said. "You're doing the hardest, most beautiful job in the world." We talked for a few more minutes before she rejoined her family. I sat back down heartful, watching Harper plop down beside Luca to show him a leaf she'd found. It wasn't just my kids I had been fighting for all those years. It was women like her, like me. That night, after dinner and bath time and a brief wrestle match with Harper's tangles, I tucked them into bed. They curled under their star-patterned blankets, ones I had sewn long before Little Blessings became a brand. "Tell us a story," Luca murmured sleepily. "Yeah, a real one." Harper added, her eyes already fluttering shut. I smiled, brushing hair from her forehead. "Once upon a time," I began, "there was a girl who thought her world had ended. She had nothing but 2 babies and a heart full of fear. Everyone thought she'd give up, but she didn't." Luca peeked, one eye open. "Why not?" "Because she had 2 little reasons not to," I said softly. "She worked hard, she cried a lot, but she never quit. And one day, she looked around and realized she had built a whole kingdom not made of gold or castles, but love and courage." Harper yawned. "Did she get married again?" I laughed quietly. "No, baby. She didn't need a prince. She became the queen all on her own." They drifted off to sleep with small smiles on their faces. I stood in the doorway for a while just watching them, my little miracles, my strength. I turned off the light, the room going still except for the gentle rhythm of their breathing. Downstairs my phone buzzed with another press inquiry. My inbox was full, orders were up, the world was waiting. But for tonight, I just leaned against the wall and let myself feel it. Freedom, joy, pride. Not because someone gave it to me, but because I fought for it and won.